Thank you so much. Let us now get back to our top story, and for more understanding on today's Constitutional Court ruling that of course followed the Western Cape High Court judgment that possession and cultivation as well as the use of Dagga for private use was now allowed. Let us now talk to a legal expert, Ulrich Roux. He joins us now on the line live from Germany. Ulrich, good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for coming through. Let us get your reaction to the judgment or the ruling.
Hi, good afternoon. Yes, certainly a precedent-setting ruling. This is, of course, confirmation of the High Court ruling of the Western Cape of last year, and the Constitutional Court confirming that the right to privacy should not be confined to a person's private dwelling, and they should be able to, if they choose, make use of marijuana in their private homes. So very interesting decision by the court, certainly.
All right. And I think that is quite a confusing point right there, Ulrich, if you can just, break that down for us. This confinement to not just your private residence, how will that be dealt with?
Well, it basically, to break it down in as simple terms as possible, it means that it will not be a criminal offense if a person uses or is in possession of marijuana for personal consumption in a private space. So in other words, in a property that he owns, in a private dwelling, in your house, in your garden, whether it is for medicinal purposes or not. This does not mean that you can grow and sell marijuana. It means that you can use it for your own personal use. So in other words, not to be abused and not to be distributed or sold. That will still be a criminal offense. But if you do use it for your own personal use and personal recreation, then it is not unlawful.
Yeah. And going back a little bit to the Western Cape High Court judgment last year in 2017, if my memory serves me well, the debated sections there were that of the Drugs Act, Section 4B and 5B, as well as Section 22A of the Medicines Act. Today, Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo ruling that Section 4B and 5B of the Drugs Act and Section 22A 9A, 1 of the Medicines Act, were unconstitutional and invalid. Explain that to us.
Yes, so the judge in his ruling found that it was an infringement on a person's right to privacy and that it should accordingly be set aside. So the Constitutional Court, in amplification of what the High Court ruled, said that Parliament now has a period of 2 years within which to rectify these acts and within which to set aside these provisions of the acts. Certainly what is also interesting is that the court found that all pending prosecutions pertaining to the possession of marijuana should be stayed pending the finalization of this act. So if a person is currently facing charges in a criminal court in South Africa of possession of marijuana in his own private dwelling, then that prosecution must be stayed immediately. In other words, it must be stopped because the act is going to be altered and changed to effect those changes as prescribed by the High Court and by the Constitutional Court. So that is effectively what it means. It is no longer unlawful for a person to be in possession of marijuana in his private dwelling, and any act which is in contradiction with that should be rectified within the next 2 years.
And part of what also came out of court this afternoon, Ulrich, is the Deputy Chief Justice, taking the view that it should be left to Parliament to sort of decide on the quantity of cannabis that an adult person may use or perhaps possess or cultivate in order for it to amount to that personal use. I suppose it may be a little bit difficult for law enforcement officers to determine whether the person concerned is in possession of that cannabis for dealing and not for personal consumption.
Yes, certainly. I mean, if a person is caught with a massive amount of marijuana, then obviously questions will be raised whether he intends to use it for his own personal use or whether he intends to sell it and deal in marijuana. And once again, selling or dealing marijuana is still a crime. This ruling does not affect that. But that will be left up to Parliament now, and I'm sure that there will be many debates within Parliament over the next 2 years to determine what the exact amount can be seen as for personal use, and if a person is in possession of more than that, can it then be deemed that he intends to deal in marijuana or not? So certainly some work for Parliament within the next 2 years, and that will be vigorously debated in order to determine that. In the interim, it will be left up to the discretion of the South African Police Services as well as the National Prosecuting Authority, whether if a person is caught in possession of marijuana and it exceeds a certain amount, whether a reasonable deduction can be made that he intended to deal in the marijuana or whether it was only for personal consumption. Other factors in this regard will obviously also be taken into account, such as, is there a certain packaging in which the person intends to package a certain amounts of marijuana? Is there evidence of monetary exchange pertaining to the marijuana? All of those factors will obviously also be taken into account if a decision has to be made whether a person is dealing in marijuana or not.
Yeah, and just finally, Ulrich, there are people who are currently convicted for being in possession of Dagga or cultivating it and using it. What happens now with such cases? Are there now better grounds to sort of appeal their conviction if they were arrested for, for personal use?
Our law does not work retrospectively. So in other words, if it was unlawful or crime at the time that the person was caught in possession, then that remains the fact. We cannot now go and change all those decisions made at the time that it was indeed a crime. So unfortunately for all people who have been convicted at this stage, no longer, they won't automatically have their charges set aside.
All right, we have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for coming through. Ulrich Roux, he is a legal expert, of course, unpacking today's ruling by the Constitutional Court. Let us now continue to give you some